Hi, welcome back to my channel. Thanks for joining me today. Today is gonna be my 1K sub Q&A. Also, it kind of coincided with my 1 year anniversary on BookTube and Bookstagram. So I kind of made a Insta post asking for questions, and I made a community post as well asking for questions. There were just a lot of questions that I received, so I'm not gonna be like citing the users one by one, but I've kind of clumped the questions into a few categories. A lot of you asked me about creating content, about books, about what I do for work, general questions. Some people also asked about slightly more theoretical questions or ideology-based questions, and people just asked me about random things like life questions and random preferences. Before we start, I don't know how long this video is gonna take. This is my second time filming this video because the first time I did it, I was so disorganized that the footage just wasn't really usable, and it just took me too long to film. So I hope that today I'll be a lot more organized, and it's gonna take some time. So grab a cup of tea. I have my cup of tea here, and we're gonna try to answer the questions as quickly and as comprehensively as I can. So cheers to that. So let's start with creating content. Do I prefer BookTube or Bookstagram? This is a hard question from the get-go. BookTube and Booksta, really two really different platforms. I would say BookTube is a lot more individualistic. I like it that I can see the creator's personality a bit more on BookTube, whereas on Booksta, it's more of like resource sharing and more contemporary affairs and a lot of things that are like beyond books. So a lot of Bookstagrammers don't share just things on books, but generally a lot of things about their life. I think for that reason alone, I would prefer BookTube to some extent because I am not someone that likes to update my life a lot in general. And I would say that Booksta does require a lot more commitment, but it can be more rewarding for people who are a lot more visually driven, whereas BookTube is more of like listening to a friend talk about things that they like. I would say I prefer to be on BookTube, but Bookstagram presents a challenge for me as like, I guess, someone who tries to make content. And it's been a good challenge. I would say that a lot of my creative challenges have been from Bookstagram rather than BookTube. So did I even answer this question? Okay, what made you start your socials as an introvert, and what gave you the motivation to go for it? Any tips for other introverts to start? This is an excellent question because it's true. I kind of still struggle with this a lot. Making content online kind of really necessitates your face being out there, and it can get uncomfortable, but this is what I signed up for, I guess. That's kind of the con of being able to put your stuff out there and having your opinions heard, is that people will now know you as a person, or that you'll now start to stand out from the crowd because of that. What gave me the motivation to start? I thought it would just be a good way to challenge myself creatively as to like, how am I going to present things that I'm reading. And talking has always been fun. It's a way of processing my thoughts as well. So I never really had plans to make it big. I never really had plans to do content in more legitimate ways. I really treated it as kind of a archive of books and ideas that I've been having. Just kind of like a blog, So what other tips would I give for introverts to start? I would say choose the platform that you're most comfortable with. And contrary to popular belief, being a content creator or like creating stuff online, to me it's a pretty good blend of introverted actions and expressiveness, because I think doing all these things, you're doing it by yourself. Like me recording right now, I'm recording in front of a camera, I'm talking to myself. Later on, I'll be editing my own face. So it's a very solitary activity. But the outcomes can be pretty social. The outcomes can be pretty, community building. I think that's the fun part of it, is that the work itself is solitary and great for introverts, but the results, the outcomes, can be a lot more socially fulfilling. So yeah, I would say that the tips, just enjoy what you do. I feel like fundamentally, if you don't enjoy creating content or editing or whatever, it's really hard to just go on. But I would say that you're gonna have to face a lot of unwanted feedback or like unwanted comments. I mean, you can't hide that fact that on the internet anyone can choose to comment whatever they like on your stuff, and there's just gonna be a barrage of information all the time, which is something that I don't appreciate as an introvert. Like, I do things really slowly, I process things really slowly, but doing things online, you kind of have to keep up with the pace. So I would say that you gotta have to be ready for that. If you do want to make content a bit more seriously, just try it out. If you feel uncomfortable, just get out of the space. And you never know until you try, I guess. It would be my tip. Another question. Pretty young women have been getting really successful on YouTube lately. How do I grapple with that knowledge, if I do? And how would it feel like to have an income based on your visuals? Wow, I really have been feeling this a lot in the past month. I sort of know that my asset as a young woman with relatively, I guess, average to conventionally attractive. And okay, I don't want to say that in the most braggy way ever, but I do have pretty pleasant features, which sounds really weird to say, but I know that this is something that is, pretty privilege is a real thing. People are going to give you attention as long as you're pretty, and even if you have very, very good ideas, if you don't fit into what's conventionally attractive, people might not have very strong reasons to click on your video in the first place or to hear out your ideas. This is kind of hard for me to grapple with as well. This is something that has been following me ever since I was young, ever since I had issues with, ever since I stepped into leadership positions as well. This was something that people always commented on. They commented on my appearances and not my skills. This has been my primary experience. People are always commenting on my looks and appearance first before my capabilities. So I feel this a lot. Honestly, I haven't really found a solution for it. I just kind of feel like if people are going to look at me, I might as well use their attention to some useful degree, or at least I should redirect their attention to something that's a bit more worthwhile. And in this case, I guess it's talking about ideas and books, and hopefully kind of raising awareness about certain issues. And I don't know, man. I just feel like I just gotta do what I can. I totally feel like it's not gonna be a sustainable thing to have an income that's tied to your appearances. I feel huge insecurities about the way I look a lot of times. So yeah, that has given me pretty good social anxiety time to time, not gonna lie, but it do be like that. Does my family or circle of friends know about my YouTube channel, and what are their reactions? Great question, really funny. I think generally people are kind of taken aback, because I think I did mention before in a video that the creator scene in Singapore is not super established. I mean, it is possible, there are some local YouTubers here and there, but no one really, I mean, it's not as like desirable as a career path, or it's not like seen as a really great fantastic thing. But generally the feedback has been pretty positive, and I've been having friends of friends tell me that they watched my stuff, and then the friends that I know personally reached out to me and said, you know what, my friends watched your stuff. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with that information? Like, thanks. Now I know that everyone knows how I look like. I would say surprisingly the feedback, the way that it's been positive, has been really like surprising to me. I just thought that people would judge me. I thought that people might find me a bit weird. I mean, I feel like people have always found me weird, but this is just like another example, another piece of evidence to reinforce that fact. So those are the questions on content creation, and I'm gonna be moving on to questions on books. A lot of people have been asking the same few questions about books. So let me just get into those questions. Okay, the very first question that keeps popping up is, what is my reading schedule like? I would say ideally I would read about an hour or two every night, but very honestly, I have not been keeping to that schedule. I've been feeling extremely distracted lately, so I try to still fit in an hour or two of reading a day at any time that I can put my mind to it. One really good tip that I have is that you can curb your social media addiction by replacing it with a habit of reading. So every time you feel the itch to just browse mindlessly on the internet, you just pick up a book and read. So this helps in two ways. It helps to like get rid of the itch of doing something. At the same time, helps to make books a lot more accessible to yourself. Like the inertia is not as strong when you want to pick up a book. So I would say my reading schedule is really flexible, but I try my best to squeeze in as much time as possible. It helps that I just really enjoy the process. So yeah, it does kind of keep me coming back to it. Favorite fiction books. So many people ask me about this. What are my what are my favorite fiction books? I thought about this question for a really long time, and um I would say, really honestly speaking, I don't really have a lot of favorite fiction books. Maybe I can make a list of it in the future, or like a video specifically talking about the fiction books that I enjoyed the most. I would say off the top of my head, it would be like Eka Kurniawan, Amanda Lee Koe, Pachinko by Min Jin, if I'm not wrong. Those are like titles that I really enjoy. I think historical fiction is always something that is like my always go to fiction genre. I don't know why it appeals to me so much. Yeah, historical fiction. Do you ever feel pressured to have something insightful to say about the books you read? I definitely do feel the pressure to say something insightful about the books that I read. And I want to reinforce this fact to everyone that if you're reading, you don't have to come out with like the best argument or thesis after having read that book. It really depends on your objectives. I mean, unless you're reading a book for research purposes, then yeah, you kind of have an agenda when it comes to reading something. But if you're just reading for self-knowledge, for personal development, for all sorts of like personal reasons, and you're not like legally bound or professionally bound, or I don't know, bound to some sort of contract to produce some kind of service out of reading a book, then I don't think you should put it upon yourself to come up with things to say about a book. It can just be simply, yeah, I enjoyed this book, or no, I didn't enjoy this book. And you don't have to substantiate it. I just feel like unless it's a very, very troubling thing, like unless you know that you feel something's amiss and you're not questioning yourself, then maybe that's a great area. But generally, there's really no need to say something insightful about everything. I kind of feel a lot of pressure a lot of times, but I also want to normalize the fact that sometimes, when you read a book, you don't glean anything from it, and that's fine, because there have been books in the past where I've read them and I don't get it, but only a few years later when I read it again, then I learned something that I didn't really pick up the first time I read it. This goes for like quite a lot of those classics, I think, or even theories that I studied long time ago. If I re-examine them now today, I'm gonna get really different insights or really different opinions. I might lose interest or start to disagree with certain ideas. So it's like things are never really solid, and things are always in process. And unless it's your job to have something to say about a book, then I really don't think there's a need to do so. Honestly speaking, there are some books that I read in my own time that I do not talk about at all in this channel or in my content. Not everything I do related to books gets out there. And that's kind of natural, right? I mean, there's no way I can fit everything that I know about books or have learned about books into videos every week or into posts every other, I don't know, week or so, right? Yeah. What are your favorite books on feminism and why? This is a great question. I would say that it's been quite a while since I really put together a list of feminist books that I really, really enjoy. And I've been catching up a lot more of contemporary books. I would say that Bell Hook's writings as well as Audre Lorde's really inform the way that I look at feminism. Yeah, but generally I kind of read pretty broadly, but I will say that there is a gap in my reading when it comes to like contemporary feminisms. I've been reading a lot more like gender and queer theory rather than just like feminist works. So yeah, that's a great question, and I'll be pretty inclined to make a separate video about it in the future. Next question. Any tips for a newbie reader? Which books to pick, and how do you keep reading as a hobby? Wow, okay, as a newbie reader, I would say that it kind of depends on the genre that you want to pick up. For nonfiction, it's easiest to get into memoirs, biographies. I guess even now, climate change books are pretty accessible. I would say for a newbie reader, it would be easier to get into fiction simply because the story is a lot easier to follow along. And I would recommend like short story collections. So if you're in Singapore, I would really recommend a lot of the short story collections from local publishers like Books Actually or Ethos. They have plenty of short story collections that are pretty entertaining and I would say pretty fun to read. And how do I keep reading as a hobby? This is tough. I just kind of feel like it is very, very fulfilling to read a book and to be immersed in the book, which is so different from any sort of other media consumption. You know, when you read the news, it's like 1 minute of your time and the ideas are very fleeting. But when you read a book, the author kind of takes the time to grapple with an idea for a really long time. And you can tell it's like months of writing or months of research or even years, right? No one really writes a book in like weeks, you know? And that kind of deliberate care and intention in writing a book is what keeps me reading books, because it's such an intentional way of dealing with difficult issues, which I enjoy the most. I just feel like it's great to get up-to-date information, but it's also really important to find a way to sit with difficult topics and to find your opinion on things and to find yourself in that kind of nuanced space. That's the part that's the most enjoyable for me, and which is why I keep going back to reading. I just feel like that would be the best way to keep yourself interested, which is intrinsic motivation, not really any sort of external validation or motivation. How do I choose which books to read? And do you feel overwhelmed by all there is to read? Definitely, I always feel very overwhelmed by the amount of books that I want to read. I would say choosing which books to read, I browse the library shelves a lot. I tend to go to a shelf looking for a specific book, and then I see the books in the region, like in the surrounding region, like, oh, okay, I kind of want to read about this, or like, oh, you know, I haven't really touched on this topic before, let me go and read it. And you know, each library kind of presents their books a little bit differently, so even if you go to the same section in a separate library, they might have different books put next to each other, which is the great thing about going to libraries and going to bookstores and wherever you might find physical books, because the way that books are put together can sometimes lead you to really interesting books. So for example, Offline Matters was a book that I found while looking for creative entrepreneurship, but it was actually a manifesto against creative work online, which was like an amazing read, which I would have never seen because it was in the business section where all these books were about, yeah, like it was about digital marketing and social media marketing. And there was this book that was about anti-social media, you know? So I would say that it's a mixture of browsing online, looking at other people's content, but a lot of it is really by like serendipity, a lot of it is really by coincidence. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to work. Questions on work. What do I do for a living? This is, I guess, the most common question. What do I do for a living? Currently, I'm in a very transitional space, so I am working as a part-time barista, which pays me $8 an hour, which is not a lot. It's definitely nowhere near sustainable for a full-time income, full-time pay. I also do a bit of social media strategizing and consulting and managing for just one client. So it isn't much. I've done some copywriting in the past as well. I don't know whether I can reveal it here, but I did work as a librarian for about half a year before I quit. So that's gonna be a juicy story for, I don't know, a close group of friends, because I don't want to say anything that would cause me trouble in this climate here in Singapore. And that kind of shows you how deep the self-censorship goes. So barista work, a lot of you know that I'm working as a barista, and a lot of you are curious as to how I manage being a barista. It seems like quite a few of you dream of being a barista as well, or that, you know, it's something that your own family members have been disapproving of. I would say yes, my family treats it as a transitional thing. They see it as more of a part-time employment and not really full-time. As we all know, we're in the middle of like the pandemic, and jobs aren't easy. Jobs are kind of come and go. There's been a lot of uncertainty everywhere, so a job is better than a no job. That's basically their thinking right now. I myself am also a bit, you know, skeptical that I can actually build up enough savings and build a life in Singapore on just a barista pay, which is something that someone did mention as well. Someone from Singapore did comment and ask, you know, if that was viable as a long-term career. And I would say, yeah, it's true. It's totally not viable as a long-term career. I only earn about $50 a day for a full shift at the cafe, which is hardly anything, because yeah, it's not anything on the owner's fault. I think it's just really the standard pay in the industry. It's around $8 per hour. And in Singapore we don't have minimum wage. We have a progressive wage model. I don't know, you can kind of search it up as well. There's just basically no kind of minimum pay worker protection sort of thing here. Someone did ask me though what my favorite parts about being a barista are, and I would say that there's so many perks to being a barista. I mean, of course there's gonna be angry customers, and I have dealt with like really troublemaking delivery persons. They would make a ruckus as to how I might have made them wait, and there's a lot of miscomm a lot of times between customers, delivery people, and the workers themselves, and the boss, and stocks and everything, inventory. It's really confusing and stressful at times, but it's really, really fulfilling when I can make the coffee and, you know, prepare the items for the customers and chat with them. You know, there was a customer that was super supportive of the work of the cafe, and you know, there were long-time fans of the place, which is really nice to talk to them. You know, I can tell that they probably came from where they were, like in a work from home situation, and going out to get coffee was probably like the only outdoor exposure that they would get in the day. So that's been really, really nice to just have that face-to-face contact. I mean, of course, socially distanced, but to just provide something that was so, like a value that's so immediate, is something that I really, really, really treasure. Yeah, and that's probably my favorite part about being a barista. I mean, other than the fact that, yeah, the coffee is great. I love coffee. But I would say that, yeah, compared to other F&B jobs, being a barista is probably one of the better jobs, in a sense that it's not as physically stressful as some of the other work in the F&B sector. For example, in being in a restaurant, a central kitchen, or being a waiter. I think being like waiting tables, you probably encounter a lot more angry customers. Generally, coffee making, people tend to value you a little bit more, or see you a bit higher status than other F&B workers, simply because of the value of the product as well. Coffee is seen as a more expensive commodity, and it does have that more luxurious air around it. So I can understand that the work itself and the kind of customers you encounter as a barista can be on the nicer side, a bit more of the forgiving side than, you know, generally customers in the F&B world. So yeah, moving on to theoretical stuff or ideological stuff, or like academic stuff. A lot of you actually really were curious about anthropology, like my studies in university and my take on anthropology. So a lot of people asked me like, okay, what did you study back in uni? What sectors of anthropology were you interested in? How was it like studying anthropology in Singapore? And okay, let's welcome the discussion on anthropology in Singapore. First of all, I did study anthropology as my major, and I did a minor in psychology. Fun fact, I was a psych major up till my last semester of junior year. So literally the last window I could change my major, I changed it to anthropology from psychology. Simply because I felt like the research methods of anthropology resonated with me a lot more. Psychology, I had my doubts about it. I still love psychology a lot, but in terms of what I could study at that time, it was really limited to very, very specific topics that I was not really interested in. How is it like studying anthropology in Singapore? First of all, anthropology is not a very established discipline in Singapore. Most people know about sociology, political science, but anthropology is only offered by one university in Singapore. So if you know, you probably know what school I was from. And because of the general lack of knowledge around the topic, most people don't prod about it. Most people are just like, oh, she's just studying some kind of humanities thing, which is great. So they don't ask me any more questions, and that's the end of the conversation. If not, they might start spouting certain assumptions like, oh, so you study bones, you study what? Like you study history? So what I kind of study in anthropology, I studied the kind of anthropology that was offered in my school was like cultural anthropology mostly. And so I was interested in studying youth cultures in Singapore. I was especially interested in studying dance, so it was a combination of youth cultures and dance in Singapore. Someone asked me, what is my hot take on incels and political masculinity? Wow, this is like a really loaded question. I have encountered men who have been very deliberately ignorant about issues around feminism and gender. Unfortunately, I don't really have like a surefire way of treating, encountering these people. I feel that if people are approaching other people with no intention of having an open conversation and no intention of holding space for other people and being kind and compassionate to other people, then there's really no need for someone to project their own hate and insecurities on someone else. Because I do think a lot of incels are projecting a strong hatred really out of the fear of having things taken away from them or having their entitlements revoked, which is a very real threat to them, which I want to be understanding of, but it really doesn't warrant the kind of hate speech and the kind of violence that they incite against women and non-men, people of all sorts of gender and sexes. I just feel like it's something that I feel is really, really, really unfortunate. And I do think that our understandings or our conversations on masculinity in general around the world have been super underdeveloped. I would say for me that's one of the main reasons why I moved mostly to gender theory and gender studies rather than just feminism, because I kind of felt like the root of the issue was really in gender differences or how people perceive gender rather than just a women empowerment issue. It was really because of this, it's really because of the way that gender plays out in our life that we don't really talk about what does it mean to be masculine or feminine, and what does it mean to have gender bending qualities. Why does it feel threatening for someone to have their masculinity questioned or to have femininity seen as such a powerful force? Why is it a challenge for these people? I think those are not questions that we tend to ask. I feel like I can empathize a little bit when men start to feel threatened by the fact that women are now so powerful, and because a lot of what constitutes a masculine identity is rooted in the fact of oppressing others. And when you take that into account and you realize that if all these oppressed groups are now gaining identities that are so powerful, oppressing them doesn't really do anything for you. You're just gonna seen as stupid and dumb, and leaves them in a place where they have nothing to identify themselves by. What is traditionally masculine and how we can celebrate that without having to talk about toxic masculinity. Is there a way for me to figure out, if a man loves baseball and basketball, how can he love those things in a way that makes him feel empowered without having to feel like he's belittling anyone else outside of that masculine realm. I just kind of feel like we tend to throw around toxic masculinity a lot, which can be used right in a lot of circumstances, but it also can be pretty difficult to move past that conversation and to talk about how positive masculinity can be a thing, or like healthy masculinity. What does that look like today? We don't really have that conversation a lot. We always talk about reclaiming femininity, which I think is great because, after so many years of seeing the feminine as weakness, we can now reclaim femininity as power. But how do we make sure that people can reclaim masculinity as power, as empowerment, without seeing it as oppressing any other types of qualities? I think that's the question that I'm super interested in. And that's, I guess, my hot take on political masculinity. I don't really know. Someone asked me, would you consider to deepen post-colonial Singapore and its relation to the colonial past? This is a great question. Post-colonial thinking in Singapore is something that doesn't get discussed very often. I think it's a very, very important discussion to have nonetheless. Generally, people tend to have a very neutral or happy or even positive thinking about Singapore's colonial past. So if you do see documentaries, they don't really talk about exploitation, or they don't really talk about racism, how imperialist or colonialist, how extractive these colonial regimes were. The kind of main dominant narratives don't really touch those kind of things. They kind of touch really safe topics like, oh, look at these colonial houses, like let's look at the architecture of these houses, let's look at how the British official in Singapore lived in the 1850s. Isn't that so interesting? I don't really know how to answer the question of deepening post-colonial Singapore, but I would say that, studying about colonial Singapore and the history of it really made me a lot more aware of how we don't really interrogate the colonial hangovers that we have. For example, the way that Raffles as a name is so ingrained in our national consciousness, right? I mean, we still kind of celebrate the colonialists. Like we kind of credit them for all these amazing improvements and advancements without acknowledging the kind of damage that they've caused, or the kinds of really racist things that they've done. I mean, yeah, sure, you can celebrate the fact that they brought British food and culture here, but do you really have to do that to the extent of erasing indigenous knowledge and indigenous history? I don't really think that has to be a trade-off that happens here in Singapore. But unfortunately, it kind of is that balance right now. But I would say there is a greater awareness of indigenous people and their cultures in Singapore. So one example is the Instagram profile called Orang Laut SG. Talks about the boat people of Singapore and their really deep knowledge of the sea and the land. Not really the land, more of like the sea and the cuisines. And it's an attempt to kind of capture and archive this culture, even as I guess youngsters kind of forget about it. I think a lot of Singaporeans don't think about this, about like what constitutes the indigenous peoples of the island. We kind of are fed with the narrative that Singapore was something that was non-existent until its independence, which is completely false, by the way. If you still think that way, then I would invite you to think otherwise. Yeah. Okay, we're moving on to pretty difficult questions. How have I applied the concepts that I've learned, decolonization, imperialism, mental health, to my work and life? Great question. Absolutely always a work in progress. I definitely feel like decolonization and imperialism, I struggle a lot with it because there's not a lot of scholarly work in Singapore that's very publicly accessible about the ways that we can move towards a post-colonial Singapore, like a decolonized Singaporean identity. A lot of our policies are still very much reminiscent of how it was like during the colonial period. One great example is the 377A. If you didn't know already, it has been done away in other countries that were colonized by the British. And it's still here in Singapore. So that's just one example. I would say that a lot of it has been really personal, individual. A lot of it has been reflected in my own personal preferences, like choosing to read certain authors or choosing to discuss certain ideas, grappling with my identity as like someone who's of Chinese ethnicity, with parents who stem from Indonesia, with family who's in Indonesia, thinking about a Malayan identity to some extent, my relationship to the Chinese language and to the Malay language, and to some extent the Indonesian language as well. I think about these things a lot. Unfortunately, I'm not fluent enough in Chinese or Indonesian to make content in those languages. But definitely those are things that's on my mind a lot, like trying to decenter the West in my way of thinking, which is why I think scholarship or, I guess public intellectuals in the region are super important, because there's a lot of citing Western imports as an excuse to not think critically about issues. But if you can show that there is a thriving sort of public opinion about difficult topics in Singapore, that would really help with efforts of decolonization and getting rid of imperialism and all that. So I would say mostly reflected in my personal life, but I am trying to have it reflected in my content as well, and hopefully to engage audiences to think about it in their own lives as well. Yeah. Okay, next question. It is said that there's a deep tension between scholarship and activism. Do you feel that there's a balance in your own work between the two, or do you favor one over the other? If the latter, do you feel any guilt or anxiety over the imbalance, or wish you could do more or less? Great question. Y'all are really giving me really amazing questions, by the way. I agree. I do think that there's a deep tension between scholarship and activism. I would say that lately, because I came from an anthropological background, anthropology is facing this as well, like, anthropology and activism, because it does necessitate you being on the ground, being heavily involved in front-end work. It does have elements of activism, and in the past this used to be criticized, but nowadays people understand that it's inevitable. If you're a researcher, you're eliminating certain difficult issues, you're giving voices to the marginalized, to the oppressed, to the unheard, whatever, that is considered activism as well. I would say, for me, first of all, I don't really see myself as like a scholarly person. Maybe to some of you I do, because I talk about books and I talk about, I guess, like big ideas, but I really don't see myself as someone that only likes to talk about ideas. I do want to be someone that tries to implement the ideas as much as possible, which is where activism comes into play. But then again, activism, I am still learning a lot about it, and the avenues for activism in Singapore can be pretty limited. I would say that there's a lot of concerns about law, about censorship, about freedom of speech here. So it's a really fine line that I'm trying to figure out. I don't really know how I'm gonna walk that line, but I would say that I do feel the tension. Sometimes it's easy to just say, I'm just interested in the ideas. I just want to talk about ideas. I don't want to be political. But no matter what, ideas are political. Identities are political. There's no escaping from activism in my point of view. There's no way of saying that your work or whatever you do or the opinions that you have are not trying to effect any sort of change. I definitely feel like a lot of times I don't know whether I'm doing enough, whether I'm just being performative in my activism, because I think anything that's public, anything that's online will be seen as performative no matter what. So that's something I grapple with a lot as well. What constitutes performative activism? What constitutes enough activism? What is real scholarship? What is a legitimate exchange of ideas versus like just talking really fluff on the internet without any sort of change to the real world? These are topics these are questions on my head like every single day. And I want to be, and this question is really good. And I guess I would direct it to the audience as well. Like, what do you think? What kind of take do you have on the tension between scholarship and activism? Great, now let's move on to the more light-hearted stuff. Because some of you asked me really fun questions. So someone asked me what my favorite music video is, and what my favorite music is, what my favorite music is. And I'm gonna give you a nice answer and then a trashy answer. My nice answer is that I love house music. I really, really love house music because I also really love house dance. My trashy answer is stream NCT Dream. Go and stream it right now. Go and stream them. Go and watch the performances. Someone did actually ask me about my experience with dance. And thank you for asking. Dance is one of the few things in my life that I've always gone back to. Another person also asked about what brings me joy, so I'm just going to answer them both. It is dance. Dance gives me the most joy. It is something that I do sincerely for myself, something that I do, just to enjoy the present moment, enjoy company, enjoy the music, enjoy life. It's really one of the few things that have given me so much, despite how little I give back, I guess. So yeah, I would say that I've been dancing ever since I was young. And I've dabbled in a lot of different genres. So I've done contemporary, I've done ballet, I've done hip hop, I've done house, whacking, soul dance, quite a few. But I would say like house dance is the genre that I always go back to. Yeah. Post pandemic, which country would you like to visit? I would like to visit Indonesia. Like I mentioned, my family is there, my extended family. My direct family is here, but my extended family is in Indonesia, and I haven't seen them for like over a year, I think. I don't even know whether it's like close to 2 years actually, because it was my senior year and times were really busy. I'm still grateful that I get to see some of my relatives here in Singapore, but it's really different. I haven't seen my grandparents for the longest time. And I think I would really like for my parents to go back because they're pretty homesick as well. So that's something that I guess would be the priority for me, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon. Did I have a teacher that helped to ignite love for learning and reading? Yes, I actually do have a very specific teacher, and that's my literature teacher back in secondary school, who actually made us read feminist work on International Women's Day, which is completely unheard of back in the day when no one knew what feminism was and no one even talked about empowering women. And this was this teacher that was like, hey, this class of all girls, we're going to talk about what makes a powerful woman. Let's talk about empowerment, And I was just like seriously blown away. And this teacher, she had the most amazing voice. Because a lot of you say that my voice is nice, but honestly, her voice was like the most perfect, soothing, loveliest voice ever in my whole life that I've listened to. And she really inspired me to enjoy reading. And all my life, I've been reading ever since then, but only really recently that I started to pick it up more seriously again. I was a much more casual reader back in my uni days because there was just no time to read. So I only read like 3 or 4 books a year actually, but yeah, after graduation, I kind of fell back into reading, which has been really great. So yeah. The last question that I have here is, what advice would you tell to your younger self? And what were the things that changed my opinions on topics like climate change, mental health issues, consumerism, other than the books that I've read? If I could talk to my younger self, I would tell her that like she's a lot more powerful than she thinks she is, and that she doesn't have to be so good at things, she can just be herself. Be in charge of your own learning, don't be afraid to be critical about things. Read the news, read books, listen to people, broaden your understanding of things, and take your time. There's really no rush. A lot of self-reflection, a lot of journaling, really to your younger self. Like, if you're young and you don't really know what to do with your life, it's okay. I also don't know what I'm doing in my life, but I feel like what matters most when you're young is to develop a sense of self. Your sense of self is always going to be fluctuating throughout your whole life. That's no worry. I guess as a young person, you owe it to yourself to be honest with yourself at least. And I think I would really recommend journaling, a lot of self-reflection, being in a constant conversation with yourself, because sometimes there are topics that we know innately but we never dare to address, just because we're so afraid, and we rely on other people to eliminate it for us. Like, we have to rely on our therapists or our close friends or family to actually point out our own flaws before we can, before we even look at ourselves and be like, am I actually this kind of bad person? Am I someone that actually doesn't deliver on what they say? Okay, finally, that is the end of the entire video. I think it's close to 1 hour of footage. I don't know how much I'm gonna cut it down to, but if it does extend past half an hour, well, thank you for staying that long. Thank you for spending that much time with me, looking at my face, listening to me talk about such random topics. Just a few quick like yes or no questions. Do I use Goodreads? No, I do not. Do I have a podcast? Yes, I do. You can go check it out. Also, I finally launched like a Patreon page. There's nothing much on it. It's just really a way for some of you to, I guess, send me some support, because some of you did talk about wanting to support me in small ways. So I launched the page just to have that avenue in case you ever do want to go further than just watching my videos. But no matter what, just watching my videos, liking them, sharing them is more than enough. Honestly, I don't really ask for a lot. But if you've enjoyed my content, yeah, I guess to check out the page as well. Oh, and this is one question that I didn't answer. Amazing. What are some of your favorite channels? I will list down the list of channels below of those I really love. It's a mix of general YouTube channels as well as some Singaporean channels I hope that you will check out as well. So thanks so much for staying with me. And yeah, do let me know what other topics you might want me to cover. I know some of you are interested in having a bit more lifestyle content on this channel, or a bit more like personal topics on this channel, which I'll be happy to do as long as I can find the time to film the videos and edit them. I hope you're having a good week. If not, I do hope that the week ahead will be better for you. Hope that you and your loved ones are staying safe during these trying times. And thanks so much for joining me in this video. If you're a new sub, or if you chanced upon this video somehow and you have no idea who I am and you just decided to watch this video, thanks for watching this video the entire way. I hope you learned something new about me today, and if there are more things that you're curious about, do let me know. Maybe I can have more story times in the next few videos or something like that, you know? So thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.